Growing up, I always wanted to understand the process of life through food, plants, and culture. When I was around 10 years old, I built a small butterfly aquarium on the side of my house. I guess I just wanted to mimic the rainforest as much as possible through smells, sight, and taste. Around the same time, I would say to myself, beauty is the essence of life. I'm not really sure why I said it or who I heard it from, but I would just say it to myself. When I was a young teenager, I got the opportunity to intern at my friend's parents' Thai restaurant, washing dishes. I'd wash dishes with Caesar, while Pitik, Pikoi, and Munta would be running the line in the kitchen. Caesar would tell me all about the amazing food he used to eat in Mexico. And wait, did I tell you about the smells? The smells of the kitchen were amazing. As the flame would hit the wok, the kitchen would be surrounded by smells I could only imagine Thailand would smell like if I ever got the opportunity to go. A few years later, I jumped on the line and I became a cook. I was this kid working with these Thai ladies getting yelled at in Thai, trying to gain respect in the kitchen. I guess I had this romantic notion of what the kitchen was supposed to be like. Each one of us having a significant role to play in constructing one single dish, much like an orchestra with multiple musicians playing this one amazing piece. I knew I'd be in the food industry for the rest of my life. After about 8 years of working for this family and their Thai restaurant, it was time for me to evolve my knowledge and learn the classic approach to European cuisine. So I decided to go to culinary school. I would travel from my small town of Redlands to Los Angeles about 5 days a week by train. When school was ending, I had no clue what was next in my life. I was newly married, and I knew I had to create a career for myself in the food industry. Luckily enough, 2 weeks after graduation, I received a phone call from one of the cooks that I used to work with at the Thai restaurant. He was running a large food operation at one of our local casinos and told me to apply and come in for a cook test. This cook test was much like something you might see on a cooking show competition. I had 1 hour to create a meal with the ingredients from the kitchen. I was so nervous, I actually puked before the interview. But luckily enough, I got the job. And the next day, I was slicing prime rib on the buffet line. About 3 years later, I finally became a chef. I had about 40 cooks working under me. I worked about 10 to 12-hour days and 6 to 7 days a week. I loved every aspect of it, every challenge that was thrown in front of me. The cooks were like my family, and the other chefs were like my brothers. But there were only two things that I hated that I knew I was never going to be able to change. Number one, I never saw my wife. And number two, I could never connect with the food on a personal level because there was no one to connect it to. I wanted to know so badly the person whose hands planted the seeds of the tomatoes that were on the buffet line, or the person who raised the cow that gave her milk for this perfect creme brulee. You don't know how often I would wonder about the true sources of different ingredients. Well, I didn't want to wonder anymore. So my wife and I started to save up our own money for our own thing. And at that time, we had no idea what it was until one day. We got a shipment of frozen fish in with plastic wrapped pieces of dry ice. And I thought to myself, I'm going to try to make a frozen custard using dry ice. I had seen the process on TV, and I had read it in books. And over the years, I had gained a huge respect for molecular gastronomy. I thought to myself, how hard could it be? So I went to the bakery kitchen with the dry ice, made a chocolate ganache-based custard, threw the custard into a bowl, then threw the dry ice in, and turned it on, and it blew up everywhere. But luckily enough, there was a little bit left in the bottom of the bowl. I took a bite, and I loved it. The texture was unlike anything I had ever had before. In my hometown of Redlands, there were so many farms that I knew of. They were so passionate about the things they grew. There were vendors that did such amazing things like coffee and a brewery that brewed phenomenal beer. I knew I could work with them, all of us, working together and creating a better home. Economically developing the town by working with each other rather than outside. So I went home that night and told my wife all about the idea, and she loved it. She loved it even more when she got to taste it for the first time. So we found this little spot in Redlands in an old building built in the 30s and started building out a storefront and a little kitchen. During this whole time, we still didn't have a dairy lined up. I felt I had looked everywhere until one day I had this amazing cheese from Northern California in Tomales Bay. I called them up and asked them where they got their dairy from, and they told me just a few miles away from where they were making cheese. They gave me the dairy's contact, and I called the dairy up the next day and asked when I could come up and meet them. We set up a time, and I drove up to Northern California the next week just to have a 20-minute face-to-face conversation. They told me how they catch the methane given off by the cows and use it to power the whole dairy, how the cows sleep on memory foam pads. And did I tell you, the cream was some of the best I had ever had. How could I not want to use them for our dairy? It took us about 4 months to build out this little ice cream shop. During this time, we opened the afternoon we got our final sign-off from the city. My wife and I thought to ourselves, we got this. We were planning on running the whole show with just the two of us. We were expecting to sell about 80 ice creams a day. Well, it turned out we were selling about 800. So we quickly hired a staff to help us out. Today, we have 3 stores going on 4, 40 employees, and this all happened in about 3 years, including a chocolate factory. We still practice and push to use local farmers and vendors at each one of our locations. We make it our purpose to teach you, the consumer, who they are and why they respect and practice their crafts. No, it's not cheaper, but ethical food comes at a positive cost. With ethics, this creates better quality and economic sustainability that's spread out. I hope everyone will start understanding that as the food industry evolves in the future. Back in the day, when we had just our one ice cream shop, people would always ask me why we didn't have a chocolate flavor. Well, the truth was, I really didn't respect the chocolate industry at the time. Large corporate companies that wouldn't stop their practice of slave labor, also making false accusations that the world is running out of chocolate. Well, guess what? The world's not running out of chocolate. Probably the first one to say that. Farmers just need to be encouraged to keep growing cacao and need to get paid fair prices for it. Cacao is not an easy job and should be much more expensive for how rigorous the process. So I thought to myself, screw it. I'll make my own chocolate. So I started buying small pieces of equipment, one of which included a blow dryer I stole from my wife. I also started sourcing a few pounds from here and there of dried fermented cacao that I knew was from reputable sources, but I wanted to do more. I'd meet with farmers on a regular basis for the ice cream shop in my hometown. Why couldn't I meet with farmers thousands of miles away that grew cacao? So I started searching on the internet for people and places that grew high-quality cacao and had ethics behind their product. And I came across a woman named Emily Stone. Emily Stone had started a direct buying company in Belize and was about to start one in Guatemala. I sent her an email, and a few weeks later, I jumped on a plane down to Guatemala City. From there, I took a small bus to Coban, which was in the north. We stayed the night and left first thing in the morning to villages that grew cacao in the Alta Verapaz region. Many of these villages that were growing cacao were Quechua, a people that are descendants of the Maya, so cacao has been in their blood for thousands of years. When we arrived at the villages, we had to communicate through 2 different translators, from English to Spanish, then to Quechua. Their stories and dreams were amazing. When it finally came down to negotiating about the cacao price, I felt there was no need in negotiating. The reason for this was because I saw firsthand of people that lived their whole life by making this one thing, cacao, better in every single way. So I decided to take it upon myself and pay above their asking price. When talking to them about who they were, who they are, and where they want to go in life, I thought to myself, how can we, our little chocolate factory, tell their stories? So instead of putting no GMO, certified organic, and fair trade on our labels, okay, don't get me wrong. I think that labeling like this is extremely important, but to me, what was more important was the stories of the farmers, the peoples whose hands touched the soil. So what we did was I asked that each farmer, in one paragraph, tell their own story. So they did, and I picked one story to go on every Guatemalan label as a representation of the Quechua people. And this is what it said. Cacao is a valuable tradition that comes from our Mayan ancestors and has been passed down from generation to generation. Quechua families from the ecoregion of Lechua dedicate themselves to the cultivation of cacao to produce the highest quality product to better the economy of our families and helping at the same time to preserve the environment for our future generations. Hector A. Ruiz Chubb. Throughout my whole life, something always came back to me that I said when I was a little kid. Beauty is the essence of life. The world was conquered for the search of food, and we did it by conquering each other. Today, let's conquer the world again and search for food together. Thank you.